welcome to a fresh new episode of Geopolitics with Swasti. I am Devdatta and today we have with us Dr. Swasti Rao, who is our consulting editor and strategic affairs expert. Swasti, of course, a lot of questions on Kashmir in what happened on 22nd April, and our subscribers have a lot of questions that they want to ask you. So I'll dive right in. One of our subscribers, Sankalp, has asked that Pahalgam happened right in the middle of a Modi visit to Saudi Arabia and a JD-Vance visit to India. Why would Pak army raise the stakes so high that the only two global powers who could have de-escalated any India-Pakistan flare-up are put in a bitter spot? And he wonders if rogue elements within the Pakistan army had a hand, because the timing seems off and it puts Asim Munir between a rock and a hard place. His other question is, could this crackdown against Faiz Hamid last year have triggered something that is not visible to the naked eye?
So Sankalp, you have asked me essentially two questions. One is on the context of the J.D. Vance's visit, and the other, which is the internal struggle, right, between Asim Munir and, let's say, Faiz Hamid, you mentioned. So let me come to that later. But first on J.D. Vance. See, first things first. The Pahalgam attack that happened on 22nd, right, that has stunned the nation. It has a precedent in the sense that you can go back in history and see that there have been enough precedents, enough examples, whenever there has been a high-profile visit to India or high-profile visit from India, Pakistan has been up to these antics. And I can give you some examples. The most obvious examples are when Bill Clinton came here in 2000, in the year 2000, in Chitti Singhpura, 36 Punjabi Sikhs, Kashmiri Sikhs, they were killed. Similarly, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee, when he took the bus ride to Lahore, there were 3 simultaneous attacks. Two of them happened in Rajouri, one happened in Udhampur. And in these attacks, about 20 people were killed. So the fact that somebody like J.D. Vance is coming to India, actually, somewhere was an early warning for us, because there were many other parameters which were also indicating at that. Whenever Pakistani army has been going through an existential crisis, like the way they have, what they've been facing in the recent years, especially a couple of years, where there is, so much Baloch insurgency and also the TTP, the struggle with the TTP, right, and the Pashto insurgency, etc. And the Pakistani army, whenever it is failing to deliver back home, would always strike at India to retain their relevance. That's the second part. And the third and the most obvious part is this very infamous vulgar speech which was given by Asim Munir on Kashmir, where he minced no words about the two-nation theory, hating the Hindus, and saying out loud that Kashmir, we will come for Kashmir, etc.
It's a jugular vein.
And all of these things, if you put together, I think there were early warnings enough for India to be a little more careful and proactive that something must be cooking. And the manner in which this attack has been carried out is also symptomatic of the fact that it's done in sheer hatred. The way they have segregated Hindus from Muslims and the way they have killed them in a very targeted manner, actually this is rather unprecedented. And taking it back to what you had asked me, it all happens at a time because from Pakistan's perspective, this is the best way to internationalize Kashmir's issue.
Right.
So they know that if there's a high-profile dignitary visiting India, and if they carry out something like this, they achieve 2 objectives. So they kill 2 or 3 birds with the same stone, which is that first, they internationalize the issue. So the entire international press starts to cover it, and suddenly Kashmir is back in everybody's mind. Second is that they landed up challenging and, let's just face it, in also destroying the Indian government's narrative that everything is normal in Kashmir after the abrogation of Article 370. So I think they have done it very, very craftily. They have been very, very coordinated, and what really stuns us is the audacity with which they have carried this out, because so far the attacks, in the last 2 years also there have been a lot of contacts that have taken place at the LOC, but most of those contacts have been between the militants, the terrorists, our armed forces, etc. The civilians, and that too segregating them on the basis of religion, is something which is very, very unprecedented. So I think there is a complacency on our part that we have to also understand, and I think the entire national security apparatus is now at work for it. But just to connect it with JD Vance, I think the idea is to internationalize the issue as much as they can. And very quickly, then there's a second part to that question, which is on what happens to Asim Munir. I mean, is he in a good place, or is he in a bad place? See, in my opinion, Asim Munir is in a good place, Dev Datta, and there's a reason why I say that, because in Pakistan, service chiefs are appointed for 3 years.
Right.
And some time ago, I think last year, they passed a new
Constitutional
amendment, and they did a
amendment.
constitutional amendment, and they said that now the service chiefs would be appointed for 5
5
years.
years.
And if Mr. Asim Munir gets another extension, that means he's going to be for yet a few more years, let's say another 5 years or so. And what you have to understand is that whenever, again, for them, and if you look carefully, the fact that there is such a serious problem with India is actually going to give him reason to continue.
Right.
If you've noticed, I don't know, that a threat from India is something that unites Pakistan. So there may be a lot of internal problems, a lot of
Absolutely.
internal criticisms, but the minute there is threat from India, everybody just lines up behind the uniform. Okay, and in that sense, Asim Munir seems to be in a good place. And with regards to Faiz Hamid, please understand, Faiz Hamid is already in house arrest for over a year.
Right.
He's also guarded by Pakistani army, and in my opinion, Hamid was pretty much an Imran Khan's man, right? And Imran Khan is quite neutral at this point. He's quite, I think, forgotten in many ways. It's basically the army which is back at the helm of everything. The prime minister doesn't matter. Nobody really matters, but the army it is. So I think, to your question, that is this about some kind of a spillover from last year or something? I'm not sure if there really is something like that to read. Because what has happened right now is something where the Pakistani army has reinstated themselves at the center of the Pakistani statecraft, saying that Kashmir is their jugular vein, and Kashmir is something that they can never forget, and Kashmir is something that lends them credibility, and therefore they can go to any extent to prove that. And that is my short answer to two of those questions there.
That brings me to my next question, Swasti. This one is again on Kashmir, and there are two questions from Anubhav Saxena, so I'll take them in parts. He first asks that the attacks have shown the chinks in the claims that the government made about security, as we talked about, and he asks about what can be done about it. The fact that the terrorists attacked at tourists and it happened for 20 minutes, there was no security. How can more accountability be ensured for it? And in his next question, but I think before we take the question on defense, maybe you'd like to answer this question first.
The fact that there was some kind of a security lapse is very evident, and I don't think anybody should be mincing their words and calling a spade, because I think the first thing that we need to do at such a time of a national emergency and a national crisis is to be very realistic, right? I mean, statements are not going to fetch us anything, abuses are not going to fetch us anything, tweeting is not going to fetch us anything. We need to basically think with one mind about the nation's security, and that is a very important thing, sincere thing to do. So let me just start there. The second thing is about, I think we are talking about two elements here, Devdatta. These two elements are, we can deter Pakistan or we can destroy Pakistan, right? Now, when it comes to deterrence and destruction, I think this is where we are basically, our response is hanging somewhere, right? When we did Balakot, we thought that we have deterred Pakistan, right? But it took them, a few years to forget that. So perhaps we would need to do another Balakot. We don't know. I think the government is already putting their act together. The government is already mulling over a serious offensive action to teach Pakistan a lesson, because they have called for it. It's like very little that we can do. And right now, the environment, if you look at the international environment, actually there is nothing restraining India's actions. I mean, there is no international actor apart from the United Nations, because United Nations is extremely sidelined, and they have to say something to remain relevant too. So I think apart from the United Nations, nobody has really called for anything that any constraints or something. So there is nothing which is constraining India's actions. India can do whatever the political will decides. So ultimately, this is a question of political will. How far are we going to go up the escalation ladder is something that our political will decide. So that's the first thing. The other thing about your lapses, I think we need to just understand it a little better. And I also recommend that you watch the Worldview with Swasti, where I have discussed the Pahalgam attacks with the General Raj Shukla, who's been an army commander and who's been posted there, as well as he's also a member to UPSC. So you will get a lot of answers there as well. But in short, see, the problem is that what you expect, or what a lot of Indians expect, that why is it that the Pakistanis are crossing over and we are not able to catch them? Please understand that in the Jammu Kashmir region and the LOC region, right, you have at a given point of time, lot of terrorists are floating in that space. Okay, a lot of them are also crossing the border. Sometimes we catch them, we kill them, and that's what we said, that a contact was made. That's the army language. So please understand that security in the Jammu Kashmir region is very complex. Okay,
Right.
what you are expecting, or what general Indians would expect, is that every single chappa of the valley and the LOC should be manned by Indian soldiers and Indian capabilities day in and day out. And I can say that it is not possible. It is not possible because we have to also man the LAC. We have to also we have to be very judicious in how we distribute our capabilities. It is not possible that you have one soldier or one troop every single 10 meters or so. It's not possible. And therefore comes the element of intelligence, because the intelligence agencies are supposed to give them a predictive analysis of where situation looks vulnerable, where a threat looks imminent,
To
and
be
then
more prepared.
so that the security forces can be more prepared, right? So you have to understand that when it is about Pakistan, please remember this very important thing. No matter what intelligence you have and no matter how many troops you have to man the valley and the LOC, as long as their regenerative capacity is going to be more or greater than our elimination capacity, we will always face this problem. What do I mean by that? We kill 10 of them, they send 12. We kill 12 of those, they send 15. So what do we do about the regenerative capacity of Pakistan? That is the crux of the matter. No matter how poor they are, no matter how distraught they are, no matter how failing they are, but they continue to remain more regenerative when it comes to attacking India. So that's the other thing. So just to sort of conclude this point, Devdatta, it is true that we have had at least 3 failures. So the first failure has been that we have not been able to stop them, or we have not been able to prevent them from entering our territory and deep inside our territory. Right? Pahalgam, the place where it happened, was a tourist spot. Okay, it was not just some forest, jungle, mountain area at the LOC. Okay, so the first has been the failure to prevent. The second failure has been the intel failure. No doubt about the fact, as I was just mentioning, that you cannot have thousands and thousands or lakhs of troops everywhere, but the role of the intelligence agencies is to basically provide them and to give them early warnings and say that there could be a something like this cooking, so that their guards are up, and the intelligence seems to have had a failure. But then there's an interesting thing about intelligence. Please remember that when intelligence succeeds, nobody comes to know. It is only when the intelligence fails is when we face the disaster. So, despite all the criticism, I think what we need to also understand is that there may be n number of times when intelligence may have succeeded and we did not come to know because it never really made news enough. Okay, so that is the interesting thing about intelligence. And third is that there has been a failure on our side to preemptively deploy forces where tourists had gathered in such big numbers because of the reasons I told you in the beginning. That J.D. Vance was visiting, there was a precedent of Pakistan doing such things whenever high profile visits happen to internationalize the issue. There was also this Asim Munir speech that we should have taken more seriously. So, and then you have all these tourists gathering at one place, and the most shocking thing was that it took about an hour for our security personnel to get
Actually
there.
reach there.
So I think that failure to really deploy troops preemptively, or to basically cater for the contingencies as to what happens if something goes wrong, I think that preparation was not there, which is a little different from intelligence failure per se. Right. So I think we've had 3 kinds of failures there. And then the last point that I said was that what do you do about the regenerative capacity of Pakistan, right? So the regenerative capacity of Pakistan has to take, if you want to tackle that, it has to take a long-term and a broad spectrum view. you have to understand the nature of the Pakistani state. So never forget that the Pakistani state's reason of existence is anti-India. So we must never let our guards down. We have to also become very professional in analyzing who Pakistan's enablers are. And today my Friday column was on who are really backing Pakistan, because Prime Minister Modi made a speech on it, right? That we are not only going to go for Pakistan, but also going to catch the backers. So we have to have a steady understanding of how China has been flushing weapons into Pakistan. And even the Chinese weapons are not of very good quality, because they keep running into quality issues. They are not battle tested. The only other country in the world that is now sending weapons to Pakistan and flushing Pakistan with weapons is Turkey. And Turkish weapons are state of the art, battle proven, battle tested, with a very, very robust defense industry. So these kind of things, and not just that, Turkey and China are also involved in PSYOPs against India. Please read my column. I go into the details of how exactly these countries are backing Pakistan and they're enabling Pakistan. So we have to look at what kind of international patronage is coming to Pakistan. What is, the weapons, like I mentioned, the illegal weapons flows that are happening in South Asia, and for sure the very rationale for the Pakistani state. So when we have a very professional understanding and analysis of these things, perhaps we are better able to understand when is it that Pakistan is going to strike us. And perhaps just the last thing on this question is that we also somewhere have to realize that whatever we thought by way of the deterrence value of something like a Balakot was not as much as we would have expected. So the deterrence value by Balakot was pretty low. It only took them a few years, to get back. And in fact, get back in a big way. If you look at, the small little contacts that keep happening, they don't really stay quiet for too long. They only wait for the international euphoria to settle, and then they sort of, come back. So I think we need to be sort of, more aware of the cycle, particularly.
Right. So Swasti, one last question. Like I said, our user had two questions before we move on to different other regions of the world.
Yeah.
And this is from Anubhav, where he asks that can India post this advance their defense upgrade program now that this attack has happened? And he also asked, should we then procure more Rafale from France immediately, and if assembly lines are chalked, give Dassault the lucrative offers to build them in India with no taxes?
No, I understand that this is coming direct dil se, right? I mean, let's just get everything right for India. Defense procurement is an elephant, and it is going to move slow, whether we like it or we don't. Certain processes can be expedited. So for example, if you're trying to have a B2B deal, like a business to business deal, it's not working out, you can go for a G2G deal. And that's how we got the Rafales. Because the other procurement, like the typical procurement channel, was taking so long and so many decades that the government of the day decided that, okay, let's just end with this and let's go for a G2G one. So you can expedite that, but it cannot be changed completely, and it cannot be changed overnight. So to buy more Rafales or not, the government of the day will decide. I think the government has already shown that they are interested in it, and I have a lot of times in the previous episodes of Geopolitics gone into explaining why buying Rafales makes more sense for us than to buy a completely new variant of the fighters. But also understand that we have limited money. We have limited resources. We cannot use all our money in buying Rafales. If we do that, then funds for AMCA and Tejas and all of that starts to dry up. So we have to be very careful in how we are, distributing that money. So judicious distribution or allocation of resources is as important as expediting the process. So otherwise, I mean, that's to your answer on whether we should go for Rafales, etc. So none of this can happen overnight. It is going to take the time it is going to take. Okay. And the other thing is that with regard to other defense upgrades, see, India is already upgrading its defense architecture. India has been making very steady improvements when it comes to getting more, better weapons on the one hand, also making more in India on the other hand, and diversifying away, getting more state-of-the-art, better battle-tested weapons, okay? But to imagine that all of that can be done overnight is not the answer, and we should not even expect that, because if we expect that, then we will not get this conversation forward. So things take time. Rome was not built in a day, and rather than making knee-jerk reactions, for example, what MAGA cult is doing, and they are backtracking on everything. I mean, just to give you an example, rather than making knee-jerk reactions, we should be taking slow but steady decisions and timely decisions. And I think that's what Pahalgam actually teaches us, that we have to get our act in time. But the act that we have to get in time has not to be a watered-down act for the sake of optics. It has to be a fundamental change in how we approach our national security apparatus, and we have to be very realistic about it.
Right. How things take place going ahead remains to be seen, Swasti. Now we move on to another region. Our user Karthik Parashar has a question from Sudan. It's been 2 years since the Sudan crisis. Are we looking at another partition? And what is Sudan's geopolitical role?
Okay, Karthik, so thank you for asking me that question, because for once I'm talking about something other than Trump and tariffs and all that. So that's a fresh departure. Thank you for the question. Now, Sudan, of course. Good you asked us this question. Frankly, Devdatta, this has been a forgotten war. I mean, the war has actually never ended in Sudan. It's been at the receiving end of all kinds of violence, whether it's ethnic violence, genocide, civil war. But it just seems that the world has forgotten about it. So good you got our attention back to it. Now, very quickly, what is happening in Sudan right now is that, of course, there are two generals that are fighting, but just to tell you about these two generals won't make sense. So let me just rewind it a little bit backwards. There's no point going too many decades back to understand what is happening today, because it becomes a very endless, talk then. But just to sort of give you a sense of what is happening today, we have to go back to 2019. 2019 became a pivotal moment for Sudan, because 2019 there was a coup, and this coup happened when a long-standing regime of President Omar al-Bashir fell, and this regime fell after many decades. Okay, so 2019 there was a coup and a new government was put in place, but that government didn't last for long, and then in 2021 there was another coup. And after the 2021 coup, General Burhan took over the country. Now, what happened after 2021 is that, on the one hand, the president of the country, of Sudan, is General Burhan, who's the army chief, and then he has a deputy, and the deputy's name is General Dagalo. He has a long name, General Muhammad Hamdan Dagalo, but he's also referred to as General Dagalo. Now, General Dagalo is the deputy. And after 2021, these two generals, like the chief and the deputy, have been fighting. And currently, what you see in Sudan is basically a direct fallout of these two generals infighting. Now, the question to ask is, why are these generals fighting, right? Now, these generals are fighting because basically General Burhan is the army chief. He heads the Sudanese army, right? But on the contrary, General Dagalo is the RSF chief, and RSF is basically this militia that came out of the Janjaweed militias. If you remember, Janjaweed militias were those original militias, that were into ethnic cleansing when the original wars were happening in that region. So basically, there is a problem between these two, and very quickly, why these two don't get along is that RSF became very powerful over the years, and after 2021 there were some differences that these two generals started having. So, for example, RSF was of the opinion that they are 100,000 strong militias, so they wanted to be incorporated into the army. They had different plans, who is going to control what region. So basically, out of those kind of things, so a kind of a power struggle, and then there was a full scale fighting that started again. So I told you that in 2021, when the new general took over, General Burhan took over, there were differences from the beginning. But in December of 2022, there were many hopes that there will be some kind of a breakthrough, etc. But nothing happened. And in April of 2023, which is very recent, right? April of 2023, then a full scale fighting started to happen again. And ever since, Sudan has once again sort of fallen into the same pit. So many would argue that Sudan was never out of that pit. Okay, Sudan has always been into the pit, and every few years there's been a cycle of this violence. Now, of course, what has happened now, if you refer to the map, you can see that the RSF, right, the Rapid Support Forces, they control some part which is the western southern part of Sudan, and the army and the president, who's the president of the country, is in the northern part. Now they are fighting, of course, as to what is going to happen. Nobody really knows, and that connects me to the later part of the question, which is that is Sudan heading for another partition? Actually, one never knows. But these militias, especially the RSF, they have a lot of influence around the Darfur region. So it may be possible that if they are, successful in exerting their, influence in that region, that Darfur may be cut off from Sudan. And if that happens, then again, it'll be a kind of a statelessness and a kind of a lawlessness. So nobody really is prepared for that. But what makes it worse is the involvement of external players. And I think that is something that, you should perhaps know as to what are the external players that are there in the region and what is their role. So for sure, like I said, that generally, if you talk about institutions like the UN, there have been n number of United Nations peacekeeping missions, etc. Our own Indian, soldiers and officers have served in Sudan. I know so many of them personally that have served there. But the point is that that's on the one hand, and that's not really worked so much. Okay, the official wars came to an end. There was a particular day, 2020, the official wars came to an end, but then another war broke out, the ones that we are referring to. So very quickly, like I said, the external influences need to be understood a little better. Now, let's start with the US. The US, for the longest time, had Sudan under a special list called the State Sponsors of Terrorism. And that's called the SST list. And the US basically removed Sudan from this list only around 2020. So US, and after that, there was some flow of, some aid, etc. But basically, US has a very careful, presence in that region, if at all. The US doesn't want to get too involved, etc. So United States has a limited presence. What you should be interested in knowing is the presence of Russia. And that is something which I track, and that makes it very interesting. So you must know that Russia, for Russia, their influence in Sudan is also the larger, is a part of the larger influence they want to wield in Central Africa and in North Africa. And they want to, of course, as you know, Sudan is very close to the Horn of Africa and to the Red Sea. So they are also wanting to sort of have control there. And the apparatus through which the Russians do it is the Wagner group. So the Wagner groups are there that are involved with the gold trade, the illicit weapons trade, and all of that in Sudan. So, of course, the Russian ambitions are very clear. Now, of course, for sure, and if I'm not wrong, the Russians also have a naval base in Port Sudan. So that kind of tells you that Russians are there in a big way. Now, they also want to sort of counter the Western influence in general. I mean, Sudan is just one part of the larger African strategy that Russia has, but Russia is also involved there. Similarly, then there is a situation where the Gulf nations are involved. And when I say Gulf nations, particularly UAE, and you would be surprised to know that while most of the other countries of the region are supporting the military, General Burhan, the military leader, the army, UAE, on the other hand, there are some reports that say that they support the RSF. Okay. Now, UAE has generally denied, but again, the long and short is that because of Sudan's very prominent geopolitical position near the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa, most of these countries want to have some influence in and some say into the Sudanese affairs because they want to protect their interests. Okay, and as you know, the Red Sea is a very important choke point as well. Similarly, talking about Egypt, Egypt is another very big player there, and Egypt also has significant interest, and it has long ties, etc. Now, of course, for Egypt, that the Nile River and the area around that is very, very important. Egypt has also been supporting certain factions, etc. And the broad strategy is to maintain influence in the Horn of Africa and safeguard its own national interests. Then there is also Israel, okay, in that region. And Israel and Sudan have had a normalization of ties lately. And what I want to tell you is that there is a whole host of external factors that are also there in the region, not just the state actors, but I told you about Wagner, which is a non-state or a shadow, an instrument of shadow state policy. So all of these actors are there. That kind of makes it very messy. Now, very quickly, will Sudan be partitioned is an answer that we cannot give now. But like I said, that if you look at the map, you can see that from nearby Chad and Libya and these countries, there are also a lot of these militias are getting recruited from these regions. Okay, so if you go into the details of where exactly the RSF men come from, so there are boys as young as 15, 16, 17 years old that have been recruited, okay, from nearby countries to come and fight. And so one doesn't know, the situation is very bad. It's massive, I would say, violence against women. There are reports that say that it's actually the women and the children that are bearing the brunt, like it happens in any war, sadly. But if at all they are able to cut off Darfur, I think then it would be like another partition like situation, or at least a de facto partition of Sudan. It should not happen, and that is the reason why all these external powers are also present and trying to balance everything. But you taking a look at the map, you can understand that not one side really dominates the entire country. So the situation, I agree, is close to a partition, but I hope there is no formal partition, because as you know, there's already been one, right? So it's Sudan and South Sudan. So anyway, we will have to see where this goes, but the situation remains very, very bad.
So, Swasti, since we already discussed UAE, Saudi Arabia, Israel, we now move on to our next region, which is the Middle East. And let's start with Iran. There are a cluster of questions around the region, but the question is on Iran and a lot of talks and discussions around the US-Iran nuclear deal. But before you answer that question, Swasti, what is the update on the US-Iran nuclear deal? And Karthik has another question where he asks, what is the state of India-Iran relations and how important is it for India that the US-Iran nuclear deal goes through?
Now, interesting. I mean, of course, I can tell you about India-Iran relations that have, just to start with the question, when it comes to the Middle East, generally India has had a policy of multi-alignment. Basically, India wants to not get into the conflicts. India wants to remain a humanitarian actor. India also wants to uphold everything that is official. So when it comes to the question of Israel, for example, we will take it up later. But I just want to say that India doesn't want to be seen as taking too much of sides. That has been the traditional policy, that India is not, it's not a mutually exclusive engagement. India wants to engage everybody. So it's like it fits very well into India's policy of multi-alignment. Okay, so that's the one lens with which you should look at India's engagement of the Middle East. Now, very quickly about Iran. You see, there was a time when India and Iran had very good relations. We will talk a little bit more about that. But what happened, particularly in 2015, when this particular nuclear deal, the US, JCPOA, the nuclear deal was being negotiated. What has now happened is that there was a deal negotiated, then Donald Trump pulled out of it, unilaterally, okay, when he came to power. And then now he's negotiating another one, right? So what you have right now is that just a few days ago, Steve Witkoff, before he went to Paris, Steve Witkoff, later on, he's a special envoy. So he later on went to Paris to speak to the Ukrainians and the Europeans. But first he went to speak to the Iranians. And there he spoke to the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, and there they started discussing about how to bring the deal back on table. Now, before I tell you what is happening in the deal, let me just tell you that it is in India's interest, because if the deal comes through, because the logic is that, okay, Iran should listen to what US is saying in exchange of lifting of sanctions. And India has interest in the India would have interest in getting those sanctions lifted, because India has significant investments in Chabahar. Right. And also there was a time that India was buying a lot of oil from Iran that we later on had to stop because of US sanctions, and then we eventually diversified to other countries, and now we're buying from Russia, etc. So in short, it will be in India's interest if US lifts sanctions on Iran. But now the question is, can that happen? And what is really going on? And that is the question on your what is happening on the deal? So yes, there is a lot of talking that is going on, but you cannot judge Donald Trump administration's progress by how much they are talking, because their problem is too much talking. Okay, they are talking, and they are counter talking and talking and counter talking. So just by talking, we will not get to anything. We will have to really see where things are. And especially about the nuclear deal, let me just tell you certain technical reasons that will help you explain that this is not going to be settled by political will only. I'll just tell you. So the thing is that what are the questions that need to be answered when we are looking at Iran US nuclear deal? The first question is, how much enrichment by Iran would be comfortable for the US? Okay. Now, when you get into that and when you get into the numbers, is when the story starts getting interesting. According to the 2015 agreement, Iran had agreed that it will enrich uranium only to 3.6% of purity. Okay. And the stockpile will be limited to about 300 kgs. Okay. So this was the condition that was set in 2015. But if you compare things now, which is after 1 decade, Iran is now enriching uranium up to 60% of purity. Okay. Just see what kind of a leap has already been made. And this is so Iran is now enriching uranium up to 60% of purity. And by the way, it is very, very close to the technical step that is required for making weapons grade uranium, which is close to 90%. So what I'm saying is that Iran has already reached 60%. And if you look at the conditions of the deal, it is a far cry from that. Absolutely. So exactly how much of that is going to be acceptable to the US after 1 decade is something that not Donald Trump can answer, is something that scientists and technical people can answer. So that is one problem. Also, the latest report by the IAEA, they said that you forget the 300 kgs they agreed upon in 2015. Right now, their stockpile in February of this year stands at around 8,000 kilograms. So what I'm trying to say is that how do you settle that question? These are the details that are required. So that's the first question. The second question that remains unanswered so far is that what about Iran's ballistic missile program? And that ballistic missile program was the reason why Donald Trump pulled out of the deal unilaterally in 2018, right? What happens to that? No discussions, nothing in the public view, right? We don't know what is happening. The third question that remains unanswered is that if this deal were to happen, what sanctions are going to be lifted and what sanctions are going to remain in place? Okay, we have no clue, no discussions on that so far. And finally, there is also a fourth question which is unanswered, which is that going by the level of Donald Trump's flippy floppy commitments, how much of it should we take seriously? Okay, because Donald Trump's administration seems to have a very poor attention span, very short attention span. Before, if they don't get results, they just move on to the next big thing. So these kind of things make the Iran-US nuclear deal talks very complex. It is not just going to be done by a political decision, like a political will, unlike the Russia-Ukraine situation, right, which is more to do with political will. This is something which where you have to sort of get into these nitty-gritties, where you have to involve a lot of technical people, a lot of scientists, and I don't think that we are going to see anything very soon. We might see some very watered-down version of some understanding, because Donald Trump administration is always in a hurry to show some result. Okay, but will that some result be enough to normalize relations with Iran from India's perspective is something that I don't think we have clear answers on. And that brings me to the question on Iran, is because I already told you that we have investments at Chabahar. See, for us, Chabahar is important because it basically connects India to Afghanistan and Central Asia, and it bypasses Pakistan. And that is why Chabahar is important, and that is why India has been investing. The interesting bit is that when the first generation, I mean, when in 2015 and then 2018, when 2015 the deal happened, and 2018 Donald Trump pulled out of it. Back then, India's investments in Chabahar were exempted from sanctions. Okay, but right now we don't have the same amount of confidence about it. Okay, so we don't know, and as a result, what has happened is that even though India, under Biden administration, what we did was that we connected Chabahar to INSTC, which is the International North-South Trade Corridor, but the problem with the corridor is that two major entities in that corridor are sanctioned, both Russia and Iran. So that makes trade not a very smooth thing for India there. I mean, how difficult it is to be trading with the sanctioned entities, okay? It really gets into a lot of those complications. And as a result, the business community wants to, steer clear of it, okay? So from India's perspective, like I said, that we are going to benefit if the relations were to normalize, if there was a nuclear deal that they were able to sign sign and the sanctions were lifted. But like I said, that there are so many technical hurdles to it that I honestly do not see a very bright future to that. And India also understands it. What India does is that India sort of manages its ties with Iran because of old time's sake, and always because it suits India's multi-alignment. But if you carefully see, Devdatta, as to what is India's policy in the Middle East, you see that Iran, frankly, now I mean, those days are gone, because the way India is doubling down on normalization with not normalization, yes, to some with Israel, the way Prime Minister Modi was the first Indian Prime Minister to travel to Israel in 2017. Okay, and the way Israel has now become one of the top three defense partners for India, the way India is invested in the region via I2U2, the India, UAE, Israel, and the US, that quadrilateral, the way India is invested in the region through IMEC, though IMEC is right now, of course, nothing is happening there because of the obvious, instability in the region. But what I'm saying is that because of all these reasons, the way we are really doubling down on our ties with UAE, in fact, UAE is the topmost partner for us in the region, the topmost strategic partner for us in the region. Now the Prime Minister is in Saudi Arabia. Qatar is such an important, partner. Israel is such an important partner. So what India does is that India just maintains its silence. India says that no, we have had historic ties with Iran. We would like to support through connectivity. Chabahar is there. But whether anything is happening, and the proof of the pudding always lies in the eating. So in my opinion, India's engagement will continue, but it is not going to be equal. We can already see that India is way more tilted towards the other, countries of the region, whether it's Israel, and all of this is coming after the Abraham Accords, which was, by the way, negotiated by Donald Trump. That was a different era. So this is how I look at India-Iran relations, particularly. That I think Iran and then one could also see that after the debacle in Syria, because the Iran and Russia backed Assad regime fell in less than a week. And after that, the way Israel kind of went, to dismantle the hold that the proxies had. Iran basically operates three proxies in the region: Hezbollah, Hamas, and Houthis. So I'm sure you have all those vivid images from the last 2 years as to what really happened. So basically, you do see that Iran is on a back foot when it comes to exerting influence in the region. Its support to Hezbollah, its support to Houthis. I mean, Israel is going all out to sort of, destroy and weaken these. Whether there'll be a permanent peace, nobody really knows. But what I'm saying is that in this situation, and then you have a India that is doubling down on its diplomatic, economic, diaspora, remittances, connectivity, and all of that with the other partners of the region. So officially, we will always have a multi-aligned approach. We will always try to diversify and keep it balanced. But if you look at the real metrics and the real numbers, I think I don't see much future to this unless the sanctions are lifted. And then again, it's a long story.
That brings us to the end of our episode.
Oh God, marathon episode today.
Thank you, Swasti, once again for doing this. And I hope you viewers send us more of our questions, and we'll see you next week with another fresh episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.